but we also do need to almost educate another generation of people who, when the Second World War and other conflicts getting further and further away in our institutional memory, that these risks are absolutely not just real and happening across the other side of the world, but they're happening here now in a different way. The asymmetric warfare, that in terms of bot farms that are using social media to undermine our trust in politics, in institutions, causing sort of civil unrest, those kind of things, the cyber attacks that we are seeing on major institutions and companies, the fire that we had in the Heathrow substation that brought flights grinding to a halt, and of course stuff that's happening off the coast as well.
Lots to get into. Let's begin with defence. We should finally get the defence investment plan this week, and it sounds as though the new Defence Secretary, Dan Jarvis, has managed to get another £1 billion out of the Prime Minister, but that is still way short of the £28 billion that has been recommended to modernise the armed forces. Christine, I want to ask you about that. What story needs to be told on defence in order to sort of justify the level of spending and potentially cuts elsewhere? I'm just not sure if the political narrative around this has built enough public support for that level of spending, and therefore we are where we are.
That's actually a very good point. I'm not sure if the narrative has been good, and I think that's been one of the problems with Starmer's government from the get-go. Their narrative has never really been persuasive. They've never persuaded us that anything that they needed to do was actually necessary. I think we need to talk about growth in the economy and the growth that can be created by investing in defence. I was at a meeting this week with the Canadian High Commissioner, and they were talking about how they had invested in defence and how they had persuaded the country. And it's actually about talking about the benefits, not of the defence spending itself, but of the investment in industry that you need to spend on defence. Talk about, take my constituency, for example, in Edinburgh West. Defence industry investment would mean jobs at Leonardo's, would mean hopefully jobs at Babcock's, although if they're going to stop building ships, that's a concern. In the west of Scotland, you've got huge defence industries as well throughout England. Talk about the jobs that could be involved, and then people will start to see the value of investing in defence and having a wide-ranging defence plan, bringing our spending up to the targets earlier. And I think that's where Starmer's government goes wrong in everything.
Yeah.
They've no narrative.
And that is interesting, Paul, because what Christine's saying there is defence has to be part of a wider story, rather than just saying the Russians might attack us, therefore we need some drones, which doesn't seem to have led to the sort of change that defence experts have been recommending. So actually, is Christine's point valid, do you think? Would you pursue that narrative, that this is part of a bigger story?
Absolutely. I mean, Christine often talks on the show about using defence as a growth mechanism because of the importance of the sector, and rightly so, understandably so. I think Admiral Sir Tony Radakin, former head of the Defence Forces, who wrote in the Sunday Times talking about £15 billion worth of defence exports that are coming out of this country. That's really important for our GDP. When I was trade envoy to Thailand, I actually helped sell £500 million worth of Leonardo helicopters to the Thais that they would. So it's really important, our exports for growth. And these are no regrets spending. So whether we are in conflict, whether we are in war, actually that kind of growth is really important. But we also do need to almost educate another generation of people who, when the Second World War and other conflicts getting further and further away in our institutional memory, that these risks are absolutely not just real and happening across the other side of the world, but they're happening here now in a different way. The asymmetric warfare, that in terms of bot farms that are using social media to undermine our trust in politics, in institutions, causing sort of civil unrest, those kind of things, the cyber attacks that we are seeing on major institutions and companies, the fire that we had in the Heathrow substation that brought flights grinding to a halt, and of course stuff that's happening off the coast as well.
The challenge is, well, for both of you, Paul and Christine, but Paul, just to ask you, is that the Strategic Investment Review said the price tag here is £28 billion. I think the Prime Minister doesn't want to quibble with that figure and wants to be able to deliver on it, because it looks completely unserious for your Defence Secretary to say the plan you've put forward means I don't think the country is safe. He wanted, I'm pretty sure, to be able to say we can fund that. But the problem is, Keir Starmer and John Healey couldn't convince the other cabinet colleagues, couldn't convince the Treasury of that argument that it was important. And that's why we're in the situation we're in, where they're saying, actually, OK, well, you want to spend more on defence, but what about education? What about cost of living? What about energy bills? And they lost the argument.
Yeah, because you've got to get the money from somewhere. So there is only so much. This isn't government money; it's taxpayers' money. So there's only so much money coming into Treasury. But Treasury also basically works on spreadsheets, so they don't particularly do dynamic modelling well. They will look at what's coming. They're bean counters that's looking at what's coming in, what's going out, and work it from there. So you've got to make tough choices. And I'm not sure yet the wider Labour Party are prepared to make those choices, because you've got to do it through things like welfare. We've talked about this week in, week out, and it's drones are the sort of sexy technology bit that we're seeing in Ukraine and through Iran and Israel. They're absolutely at the core. But how do you get them to the centre of conflict? You need boats, you need ships to actually get them there, to get people there, and then of course you need bullets to put people in guns. There's some far more bland stuff that actually you've got to get done as the foundation to then deploy that drone warfare if you should need it.
And talking about bland, Christine, it's even things like military housing and accommodation. You know, we need to boost the number of people in the army and the morale of the people who are still currently there, so they've got longer careers rather than leaving earlier.
We do. And I think one of the interesting things that actually Yvette Cooper said in a different piece that we'll be talking about today is that this is just the first tranche of spending, that this is about getting better equipment to our forces on the front line. But yes, you're right, we do need ships, we do need a broad force. But if this is just the first step, then that could be a good thing. But yes, we also need the infrastructure. And that, again, I hate to harp on about it, but that, again, if you're going to have to build more houses for the armed forces, you're going to have to build an infrastructure, you're going to have to invest in doing that. That creates jobs, that creates growth in the economy. There is a benefit to us of investing in defence. And we have to see that it's not just about fighting the Russians or the Chinese or whoever. It's about investing in this country and what's good for us. And I think it's interesting also that, according to the article today, Dan Jarvis has managed to get £1 billion more than Healey did. Now, that begs the question about, was it a personality thing, perhaps, with the Defence Minister and the Prime Minister? Or, has the Prime Minister given up on the argument that we can't find more money? Is Dan Jarvis more persuasive? Has Andy Burnham intervened? We don't know. We'll have to wait until we actually see the plans in front of us to know, is it just the first step? Will there be warships down the line? And what is going to happen to our wider forces?
I think
of course it was interesting that the article in the Sunday Times said that Andy Burnham has signed it off. He's already assumed that he's assumed the crown already, which is quite interesting.
Yeah. Well, on that though, I do wonder if Paul, what Christine's saying there about the argument around growth and what Yvette Cooper has hinted at, if actually that is something that we should give just a bit more time and credibility to, that while the defence sort of former bosses and the Strategic Defence Review wanted £28 billion now, that actually if growth is part of the story, that why not pace ourselves a bit and be a bit more realistic and say £15 billion now is good, and Andy Burnham can always come back and announce more whenever he likes. If the story is positive, growth is happening, and he's got more money to spend in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, whatever, then maybe he does get to the right number. Is it just about pacing ourselves?
It is, but it's also, these things take a long time to build, so you need a degree of certainty. To build a destroyer or aircraft carrier and those kind of things, they take a decade. So you sort of need to, so you're not going to be spending the money today anyway. So you can still put it into the plan, understand you've got the growth, and you don't spend the money on day one. So actually,
is that not a problem the Conservative Party had, though, Paul? That it kept making plans for things. Is that not the problem that, as I say, the Labour Party say they inherited, that the Conservative Party made plans for things without identifying the funding, and then you can't do it. So, I mean, you have to find a balance. And you can't just say we will build it. Yeah.
I think that's the risk also of saying this is the first tranche. We'll sort out some of the other bigger problems in the next one, which has got absolutely no commitment to it attached to it at all.